She was finally happy. That was the part that hurt the most about what came next. That it arrived on one of the best mornings she had known in years. No dread when she opened her eyes. No hollow feeling in her chest. Just sunlight. Just coffee. Just the sound of Lisbon waking up beneath her window like a city that had been waiting to meet her whole life. 6 months ago, she had walked out of an apartment in Lagos with one bag and a one-way ticket. Now she had terracotta walls, a jewelry brand with a wait list, and mornings that belonged entirely to herself. She had stopped flinching when her phone rang. She had stopped dreaming about the bedroom doorway. She was, slowly and genuinely and without anyone's permission, becoming okay. She was standing barefoot in her kitchen, coffee in both hands, watching a pigeon argue with the windowsill when the knock came. Soft, almost apologetic. She opened the door to an empty hallway. Just a small cream envelope on the doormat. No stamp. No return address. Just her name on the front in careful, unhurried handwriting. Inside was a photograph. A man she didn't recognize. 60, maybe older. Gray at the temples, sitting outside a European cafe looking directly at the camera. Not smiling, not sad. Just waiting. Like a man who had been patient for a very long time and had finally decided to stop. She turned it over. 4 words on the back, written in handwriting that her brain didn't recognize, but something deeper in her, something that was still 6 years old and still looking. Knew immediately. I never left you. Zara sat down on the hallway floor. The coffee went cold. Nothing about the morning would ever be the same. 6 months is not a long time, but sometimes 6 months is the difference between a person who is surviving and a person who is living. And by the time November settled over Lisbon with its soft gray skies and golden afternoons, Zara Osi had quietly, stubbornly, become the second kind. The jewelry brand started as something to do with her hands. A workbench in the corner of her apartment, some tools, some wire, some beads she bought at a market on her 3rd day in the city because she needed to touch something real. She had no plan. She posted one photograph on Instagram, a single brass cuff catching the morning light on her windowsill, and went to bed. She woke up to 47 messages asking where to buy it. Within 3 months, she had a wait list. Within 5, she had been featured in a small Portuguese design magazine, her face half in shadow, her hands center frame. The headline translated roughly as, "The Nigerian Woman Who Makes Grief Beautiful." She laughed for a long time when she read that. Then she cried a little. Then she went back to work. The apartment was small and warm and entirely hers. Terracotta walls. A kitchen window that let in more light than she knew what to do with. A bed she starfished across every night without apology. She had stopped flinching at notifications, stopped rehearsing conversations with people who no longer deserved her mental energy, stopped waking at 3 in the morning with her chest tight and her mind already running. She called Adiz on Sundays. She was learning Portuguese badly and joyfully. She had a favorite cafe 4 minutes from her door where they already knew her order. She thought the worst was behind her. That is the thing about the ground shifting. It never announces itself. It doesn't give you time to brace. One morning, everything is light and coffee and the sound of the city, and then a cream envelope is in your hands, and 4 words written in a dead man's handwriting are looking back at you, and the person you spent 6 months carefully building starts to tremble at the edges, not because the betrayal is back, but because something far older and far deeper has just cracked open. And this time, it isn't her heart at stake. It is everything she has ever believed about who she is. The call came 3 days after the envelope. Zara had not slept properly in those 3 days. She had placed the photograph on her kitchen table and sat with it at different hours, morning, midnight, the gray in-between of 4 a.m., as if a different light might make it make sense. She had read the 4 words on the back so many times the ink felt worn, though it wasn't. I never left you. She had no way to verify the handwriting. She had no letters from her father, no birthday cards, nothing with his hand on it. Demi had kept none of that. At the time, Zara had understood it as grief. Now she was beginning to understand it differently. Her phone rang on a Tuesday morning. Lagos number. She almost didn't pick up. Is this Zara Osei? The voice was calm, professional, unhurried. A woman. Who is this? My name is Simi Adeyemi. I'm a certified fraud examiner working with a financial investigations firm retained by the EFCC. I'm sorry to contact you without warning. I've been trying to reach you through your previous Lagos address for several weeks. A brief pause. I need to speak with you about Kalade Brahma. Zara sat down. Simi explained it carefully and without drama, the way someone explains something difficult to a person they need to stay calm. Kalade was under investigation for a sophisticated laundering operation. Money moved through a web of shell companies registered across Lagos, Abuja, and London, cycling through legitimate-looking businesses before landing in private accounts. The scheme had been running for at least 7 years. Several people were already facing charges. Then Simi said the thing that changed everything. Zara's name appeared in the incorporation documents of 3 of the shell companies. As a director. With her signature, her national identification number, her date of birth, her mother's maiden name, details that would not be easy to guess, attached to each registration. Zara had never signed anything of the sort. She had never heard of any of these companies. She said this clearly, and Simi said she believed her, which was why she was calling rather than arriving with a warrant. Someone used your identity, Simi said, deliberately and repeatedly. And whoever did it had access to your personal documentation over a long period of time? Zara stared at the photograph on her kitchen table. What do you need from me? She asked. Your cooperation, access to any financial records you have, and your willingness to help us trace where your documents were obtained and who had access to them. She said yes, without hesitating. She was thinking about Claude, his charm, his access to her life, the years he had spent close enough to photograph her passport without her noticing. She was angry, but it was a familiar anger. She knew this shape. She thought she understood what she was walking into. She didn't. Because Simi had not yet mentioned the holding company sitting at the center of the entire network. The one everything traced back to. The one registered in 2004. 2 years before Zara even knew Kalade existed. That part was still coming. Simi flew to Lisbon 2 weeks later. Zara had offered to come to Lagos and Simi had said no, firmly and without much explanation, and something in the way she said it made Zara understand that the no was protective rather than inconvenient. Whatever this was, it was safer to keep Zara out of Nigeria for now. They worked at Zara's kitchen table, the same table where the photographs still sat, face down now, because Zara couldn't concentrate with the man in it looking at her. Simi arrived with a laptop, 2 external drives, and a thick folder of printed documents that she laid out with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this many times and understood that the truth was best delivered slowly, in pieces, so the person receiving it had time to keep breathing. The shell companies were the starting point. 3 of them bore Zara's forged signature. 5 others were linked through shared addresses, shared bank signatories, shared phone numbers that traced back to SIM cards registered to people who, when investigated, turned out not to exist. It was careful work. Years of it. The kind of structure you only build if you are planning to need it for a long time. Kalade's name appeared consistently from 2018 onward. His signature, his company accounts used as transit points, his name on correspondence. The evidence against him was substantial, and Simi did not soften it. But as she walked Zara through the documents, she kept returning to the same point. The network didn't begin with Kalade. It was already running when he arrived. He had been plugged into something pre-existing, something with foundations laid long before he appeared in Zara's life. Every shell company traces back to a single holding firm, Simi said, pulling up a document on her laptop. Registered in April 2004, this is the route. Everything else grows from here. Zara leaned forward. Who registered it? That's where it gets complicated. Simi turned the laptop slightly. Every official copy of this registration that exists in the CAC database has the director's name redacted. Manually, from what our document analysts can tell. Someone went into the physical records and removed it. It would have taken access and it would have taken time, but it was done thoroughly. She paused. Almost thoroughly. She opened the second folder and removed a single printed page. Slightly grainy, like something scanned from a photocopy of a photocopy. One version was filed with a land registry in Abuja in 2005 as part of a property transaction. It sat in a completely different government database. Whoever redacted the CAC records didn't know this copy existed. Simi placed it on the table in front of Zara. This is the original, unredacted registration document. Zara picked it up. She read the director's name once. Then she read it again. Slowly, the way you reread something when your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are clearly seeing. Emmanuel Osei. Her father's name. His full name. His date of birth listed beneath it. His signature on the line at the bottom. The man who had been dead for 23 years. Zara put the paper down very carefully, the way you put down something you are suddenly afraid to hold. She asked Simi to leave. Not unkindly. She just needed the apartment empty. Needed the documents off her kitchen table and the laptop closed, and the careful professional voice gone so she could sit alone with what she had just read and let it be as enormous as it actually was. Simi understood. She packed up quietly, left her card on the counter. Ian said she would be in Lisbon until Friday if Zara needed her. The door closed softly behind her. Zara sat at the table for a long time. Then she turned the photograph face up. The man outside the European cafe looked back at her. 60, maybe older. Gray at the temples. Patient eyes. She had looked at this photograph for 2 weeks and seen a stranger. Now she looked at it and felt something shift in her chest. Not recognition exactly, but the shadow of it. The ghost of a face she had last seen when she was 6 years old, and had spent 23 years trying to remember clearly enough to hold on to. She went quiet for 3 days. She didn't call a daze. She didn't open her workbench. She ate because her body required it and slept in short, restless stretches and mostly just sat with the question that had replaced all other thoughts in her mind. On the 4th day, she opened her laptop and started digging. She began with the death certificate. She had never actually seen it as an adult. It was the kind of document you know exists without ever needing to look at it directly. She contacted the Lagos State Registry through their official records request portal, paid the processing fee, and waited. When the scanned copy arrived in her email, she opened it slowly, the way you open something you are not sure you want to see. The inconsistencies were not subtle once she was looking for them. The attending physician's name appeared on the certificate, but the medical license number printed beside it belonged, according to the Medical and Dental Council of Nigeria's public register, to a doctor who had been struck off the register in 1999, 2 years before her father supposedly died under his care. The spelling of the hospital name had one wrong letter, small, easy to miss if you were a grieving family and not a person looking for a reason to doubt. She contacted the hospital directly, a teaching hospital in Lagos still operating. She explained she was requesting historical admission records for a family member. 3 days later, the records department responded. No admission record existed for Emmanuel Osei at any point in their system. The burial plot took longer. She hired a Lagos-based lawyer through a recommendation from Simi, a quiet and thorough woman named Barrister Chiamaka Ease, who made the trip to the cemetery in person. Chiamaka called her on a Wednesday afternoon, and her voice was careful in the way voices get when the information they are carrying is too significant for a casual tone. The plot existed. The headstone existed, weathered and real, her father's name carved into it with his dates beneath. But when the cemetery's maintenance records were pulled, there was no record of a burial. The grave had never been filled. Emmanuel Osei had not been buried there. Emmanuel Osei had not been buried anywhere. Chiamaka flew to Lisbon. Zara had asked her to. She needed someone in the room who understood Nigerian law, who could help her read what she was finding without letting emotion overtake the process. Chiamaka arrived with a rolling suitcase and the energy of a woman who had seen many difficult things and had learned to move through them efficiently. She sat at the kitchen table where Simi had sat weeks before, and together they began to assemble the full picture. It took 4 days. Emmanuel Osei had been, By every account they could find, a careful and successful man. He had built a logistics and property business through his late 20s and early 30s. Modest at first, then substantial. By the time he married Demi, he had 3 properties in Lagos, a functioning company with 12 employees, and a portfolio of land holdings in Abuja that had only grown in value over the years. He was not flashy. He was the kind of wealthy that compounds quietly, that doesn't announce itself, that simply accumulates if you leave it alone long enough. The marriage, Chiamaka pieced together through court records and a sworn affidavit from one of Emmanuel's surviving business partners, had deteriorated badly within 4 years. Emmanuel had consulted a lawyer about divorce in 1999. He wanted out. He wanted to take his assets with him, which was his legal right, and he had documentation to support his ownership of everything he had built before and during the marriage. Demi would have lost almost everything. What happened next was not impulsive. That was the thing Zara kept returning to as Chiamaka laid it out. This was not a decision made in anger or desperation. It was planned, methodical. It required research, coordination, and at least one corrupt official willing to falsify government documents for the right price. A death certificate issued through a contact in the Lagos State Registry. A cooperative funeral home that provided a casket and a service without a body. A headstone ordered and installed. A performance of grief sustained long enough and convincingly enough that no one, not family, not friends, not authorities, thought to look beneath it. Emmanuel disappeared. Demi buried him publicly and mourned him loudly. As his widow, she inherited everything: the properties, the company, the land in Abuja, the accounts. All of it transferred cleanly and legally to a grieving woman with a young daughter and every social sympathy on her side. And Zara, 6 years old, crying at a funeral for a man in an empty grave, was the final piece of the architecture. A motherless child, people said. Fatherless, they meant. Demi corrected no one. The child made the story airtight. A woman with a daughter to raise alone does not get investigated. She gets sympathy. She gets help. She gets left alone to do whatever she needs to do. Zara was not just Demi's daughter. She was Demi's alibi, her cover, the human proof that the grief was real. Zara stood up from the table and walked to the window. Lisbon spread out below her, indifferent and golden and calm. She had spent her entire life as a prop in someone else's story. She had not known. That was the part she kept having to remind herself. She had not known. Simi came back on a Thursday. Zara had asked her to return once she and Chiamaka had finished mapping what Demi had built. She needed Simi's side of it now, the financial investigation, the records, the part that connected the past to Kolade. She needed the full picture, even if the full picture was going to be the hardest thing she had ever sat with. Simi arrived with new documents. She laid them out the same way she always did. Carefully, in order, no drama. Zara had come to appreciate that about her. The facts were devastating enough without anyone performing around them. The phone records came first. Calls between Kolade and Demi dating back 14 months before that first dinner. Not occasional calls. Regular ones, weekly, sometimes more. Long ones, the kind of call frequency that exists between people who are working on something together, not people who have just met. Zara looked at the dates and felt something cold move through her. 14 months before the dinner meant Kolade had known Demi for over a year before he ever sat across a table from Zara and looked at her like she was the most interesting person in the room. Then the emails. Simi had obtained them through the investigation's legal access to Kolade's business accounts. There were 17 relevant messages between Kolade and a proxy email address that forensic analysis had since linked to Demi. The language was careful. They were not careless people. But the meaning, once you understood the context, was unmistakable. One email, dated 6 weeks before the dinner, contained a single line that Zara read 3 times before she could move past it. Simi had highlighted it in yellow. It said, "She doesn't know anything about the estate. Keep it that way." She. Zara put the page down. She picked it up again. She. Kolade had been recruited. That was the only word for it. Demi had identified that Zara, now in her late 20s, was approaching the age at which people begin settling estates, asking legal questions, looking into inheritances. The assets Emmanuel had built, what remained of them, and what Demi had grown through the shell company network, were at risk if Zara ever started paying attention to what she was legally entitled to. She needed Zara looking forward, not back. Occupied. Trusting. Planning a future so bright it blinded her to the past. So she found Kolade, a man already operating in gray financial territory, already open to arrangements that didn't survive scrutiny. She offered him access to the network, a cut of the operation, and a simple job. Get close to her daughter, keep her happy, keep her distracted, make sure she never asked the wrong questions. The proposal had been Demi's idea. Simi found the message where she suggested it. Put a ring on it. She'll spend the next 2 years planning a wedding. Zara sat very still. Every moment she had cherished. The balcony in Accra, the good morning texts, and the way he listened when she talked about her work, ran through her mind like footage she was watching from very far away. He had not fallen in love with her. He had been assigned to her, and he had been very, very good at the job. She booked the flight to Bordeaux on a Sunday night without telling anyone, not Simi, not Chiamaka, not even Adaiz. This part she needed to do alone, without anyone managing her expectations or softening the edges or reminding her to be careful with herself. She had the address. Chiamaka had tracked it through the investigation, a quiet street in a residential neighborhood outside the city center. And she had a name. Not Emmanuel Osei. A French name, plain and unremarkable, the kind of name designed to disappear into a country and stay disappeared. She found the house on a Tuesday afternoon. Small, well kept. A garden in the front with the particular tidiness of someone who has a lot of time and not much else to fill it with. She stood at the gate for a long moment before she opened it. She knocked. The man who opened the door was older than the photograph. Thinner. The gray at his temples had spread to take over everything, and he moved with the careful slowness of someone whose body had started to make its age known. But the eyes, she understood immediately, looking at them, why some deep part of her had recognized the handwriting on the back of the photograph. The eyes were familiar in a way that had nothing to do with memory and everything to do with biology. She had seen them every morning in the mirror for 29 years. He looked at her and said nothing. His hand gripped the doorframe. She said, "You sent the envelope." He nodded. "Then you owe me the truth." He stepped back. She walked in. What followed was not the reunion she had imagined as a child, in the years before she stopped allowing herself to imagine it. There was no embrace. There were no easy tears and no music and no moment where everything resolved into warmth. There was a small kitchen, 2 chairs, 2 cups of tea that went cold, and a man who had spent 23 years rehearsing this conversation and still could not get through the first 10 minutes without his voice breaking. He told her everything. The marriage collapsing, the lawyer, the divorce papers. And then, Demi telling him, very calmly, that if he pursued the divorce and the asset separation, she would go to the authorities with fabricated evidence she had spent months constructing. Financial crimes, fraud, the kind of allegations that in late 90s, Nigeria would have destroyed him completely before he could disprove a single one. He had not believed she would do it. Then she showed him what she had prepared, and he understood that she absolutely would. He ran. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself he would find a way back to Zara once he was safe, and had built a legal case. He told himself this for 23 years while fear and shame kept him exactly where he was. Zara listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said the thing she had been holding since she walked through the door. "I cried at your grave. I was 6 years old and I cried at an empty grave and you were alive." He closed his eyes. "I know," he said. "I know." It wasn't enough. She stayed anyway. She landed in Lagos on a Wednesday morning. No one knew she was coming except Simi and Chiamaka, and the 2 EFCC officers who had been coordinating with Simi's firm for the past 6 weeks. Zara had deliberately told no one else, no aunts, no old friends, no one who might mention it to the wrong person. She was not here for conversation. She was not here for confrontation. She was here to finish something, cleanly and completely, and then leave for the last time. She had not been back in 8 months. The heat hit her the moment she stepped out of the airport. That specific Lagos heat that wraps around you immediately, that she had grown up inside without ever noticing it. She noticed it now. She noticed everything differently now. They went to Demi's house first. Zara stayed in the car. This was a decision she had made deliberately, after a long conversation with Chiamaka about what she could and could not handle. She had the right to be there. She chose not to be. She watched through the window as Simi and the officers walked up the path she had walked up 1,000 times as a child, knocked on the door she had come home to after school for 18 years. She watched the door open. She watched her mother's face. Even from this distance, even through glass, she could see the exact moment Demi understood why they were there. Demi did not scream. She did not run. She straightened her back and lifted her chin and walked out of her own house with the officers the way she had done everything her entire life, performing dignity right up until the moment it was no longer available to her. The car drove past and Zara did not look away. Kaladi's charges had been upgraded 2 days earlier. The fraud case, now fully connected to Demi's network and the forged identity documents, had collapsed into something considerably more serious. His lawyers were already in damage control. It would not be enough. The asset recovery process would take time. Chiamaka had been honest about that. Nigerian legal proceedings were slow, and the estate had been fragmented across 2 decades of careful restructuring. But the foundation was there. The documentation was solid. Emmanuel, from Bordeaux, he had provided a full sworn statement. What had been taken from him, and by extension from Zara, would not be fully returned. But enough of it would be recovered to matter. Zara asked to be driven past the house one more time before the airport. She looked at it through the window. The bougainvillea her mother had planted along the left wall, still flowering, violent and pink. The front door painted the same green it had always been. A house that looked, from the outside, exactly like a home. She thought about Demi. Not with anger. She was past anger. With something quieter and sadder and more honest. A woman so afraid of being left with nothing that she spent her entire life taking and building and controlling and performing, and ended up with nothing anyway. The thing she feared most had found her regardless. Zara understood it. She did not forgive it. Those were 2 different things, and she had learned, finally, to keep them separate. Airport, she said quietly. She did not look back. She went home to Lisbon, to her terracotta walls and her morning light, and her life, the one she had chosen, the one that belonged entirely to herself. She knew now where she came from. She knew who she was beneath all the stories that had been told about her and for her, and around her without her knowledge. It was enough. It was more than enough. They say betrayal breaks you, and maybe it does, for a while. But Zara would tell you something different. She would tell you that the breaking was necessary, that you cannot build something real on top of something false, that sometimes the people who hurt you most are simply doing you the violent, unwanted favor of clearing the ground. She didn't choose the fire, but she chose what she became in the ashes. If you made it to the end, you're family now. Subscribe, leave a like, and drop a heart emoji in the comments so I know you were here. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.